For a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are in, quote, serious danger, according to France's foreign minister. The comments were made last month at a conference attended by more than 20 countries aimed at reviving the long-stalled peace process. Israel was quick to reject the effort, saying that the best way to resolve the conflict is through direct bilateral negotiations with the Palestinians. Fast forward to earlier this month when Egypt's foreign minister visited Israel for the first time in 9 years, bringing with him a new peace initiative, one that seemed to be greeted with more enthusiasm by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Later we'll talk with an Israeli and a Palestinian about the latest prospects for peace, but we begin with CCTV's Stephanie Freid in Tel Aviv and Adel El-Mahrouky in Cairo. And Adel, there are reports that Egypt offered to host direct confidence-building talks between the Israelis and the Palestinians. What do we know about that proposal that the Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry presented to the Israelis?
Well, basically, it's the same approach Egypt has always took towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Egyptian intelligence, or the Mukhabarat, has been the key negotiator between both Palestinian factions, whether it's the PLO or Hamas, and at the same time they have direct contacts with Israeli officials to discuss these talks. For months, we've seen President El-Sisi trying to reattempt to revive these talks. So basically, Egypt is at a stage where it's independently talking to all parties, and once there are solid points to be built up for direct talks, Egypt will probably be taking the lead in hosting these talks here, maybe in the Sharm el-Sheikh city, where it was used to have similar meetings and similar negotiations between Palestinian officials in previous years.
Stephanie, by all accounts, Israel has not rejected Egypt's proposal. So where do things stand from Israel's perspective?
Well, publicly, from the outside, everything looks very warm. It looks very positive. Certainly, we are seeing Mr. Netanyahu standing next to Egypt's foreign minister, smiling. From his office or from his ministry, we're hearing statements that the prime minister welcomes Egyptian President al-Sisi's initiative for peace. Bear in mind here that Egypt has been a major player historically between the Palestinians and the Israelis whenever there's been forward movement between the sides. But again, it looks very positive from the outside. Mr. Netanyahu, as Adel said in Cairo, he's also entertaining the idea of going back to this 2002 Arab League proposal, which would call for an independent Palestinian state, peace between Palestinians and Israelis, and in exchange, Israel would get peaceful relations with Arab neighbors in this region. But on the flip side, on the inside, what we're not seeing are the skeptics and the critics that are saying that very possibly this is external, and that Mr. Netanyahu is smiling and looking as if he's moving forward or willing to move forward with the Egyptian proposal. But this is a way of off-putting the French initiative, which he has absolutely flatly said he's not wanting to go forward with, and also to push off international pressure, quite frankly, pressure to continue moving forward momentum. So there are some critics that are saying that perhaps it's not as positive as we're seeing on the outside. Anand?
Adel, what's the mood in Cairo? Is there optimism that this initiative might jumpstart talks?
Well, basically, it is the same as many other initiatives that have been, or attempts from the Egyptian government to approach for a peaceful solution and a two-state solution for the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. But mainly this time, what has been quite remarkable about the wordings or the phrases used by Egyptian officials, whether it is the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi or the Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry, is that both have stressed very clearly that Israel's peace and Israel's safety is an important and integral part of this process, which has been a wording that is not very common in previous Egyptian officials' direct statements or public statements before, particularly if we're talking about the 3 decades for former President Hosni Mubarak. So that's a first step that, or first time that Egypt will be clearly standing by the safety and the peace for the Israeli people in general. These are words that have never been heard before.
Stephanie, much has been made of the tense relationship between Prime Minister Netanyahu and the US President Barack Obama. Any sense from the Israelis whom they would favor in the upcoming election, who might be more helpful to the peace process from their perspective, Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump?
Preliminarily, essentially, what it is the predictable versus the unpredictable, and that would be Hillary Clinton, who Israelis know. She was the Secretary of State under President Obama. She was the Secretary of State when there were direct negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis. She knows the region, she knows the players. There's a comfort level there for Israelis. On the flip side, there's Donald Trump, who people don't know, and they're not sure if they trust what he's saying. This is what's coming from polls here. They also don't know about his experience level, and they're not sure. He is unpredictable, and they feel that some of his statements are unpredictable. He's quote-unquote a wild card. Just to sum it up, though, recently in a poll, most Israelis think that Donald Trump would do better for Israel than Hillary Clinton. But most Israelis would like to see Hillary Clinton, this is a recent poll, as president.
Thanks, Stephanie. That's CCTV's Stephanie Freid and Adel El-Mahrouky reporting. Joining us from Jerusalem to talk about the prospects for peace is Amotz Asa-El. He's a senior commentator with the Jerusalem Post. With us here in Washington is Laila El-Haddad. She's an author, commentator, and advisor to the Palestinian Policy Network. And joining us from Los Angeles is Hamoud Salhi. He's an expert on the Middle East. He currently serves as Associate Dean at California State University, Dominguez Hills. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Hamoud, let me start with you. As we reported, the peace process broke down 2 years ago. So remind us again why we are at this situation right now. No peace process for 2 years. We are at stalemate. What happened?
Well, actually, in more than 2 years. There are a lot of things happening in the Middle East. There is the Arab Spring. There is a new threat of Daesh. There are huge economic issues, political issues, legitimacy of the Arab regimes. But what is significant in the last maybe 6 months or so, even the last few weeks, that you have actually a movement, despite its limited significance in the region, discussing or talking about the prospect for jumpstarting this process. Whether this is good or not, it remains to be seen. We've seen, for example, a meeting of the Arab League Summit, despite its failure in Nouakchott, which its communique finally talked about reminding the Arab world that the core issue is still the Palestinian-Israeli issue. We had a visit of the Egypt's foreign minister to Israel since 2007, and there were some issues, but the issue of the Palestinians was raised. And then on the top of that, you have the Paris meeting. All of this were significant and a movement. But again, the Palestinian-Israeli issue is very, very complex. So there are so many side issues that we need to consider. And it doesn't seem to be at the top of the agenda. The agenda today is how to deal with terrorism, how to deal with the issue of Syria, how to deal with the issue of Iraq, how to deal even with the issue of Yemen. And on the top of that, the perception of the Iranian threat.
Okay, well, as you say, lots of things happening. Amotz, from the Israeli point of view, what is it going to take to get this peace process back on track?
I think that Hamoud is very right, that the region is rife with distractions that overshadow the agenda right now and simply leave neither time nor patience for what has now emerged as a marginal issue in the region. We're talking about a region that stretches from the shores of the Atlantic to the shores of the Indian Ocean and houses or inhabits some 300 million people. And the travails of an aggregate 10, 12, 15 million Israelis and Palestinians simply dwarf compared with the mass killings in Syria, in Iraq, and in Libya, and in Yemen, and the challenges to the time-honored regimes in these and other countries in the region, and the severe economic problems in the region's most important country, Egypt, and also even in the Gulf states. And in these general circumstances, I don't see the magic wand that will suddenly change the agenda and also reinvent the situation between the Israelis and the Palestinians anytime in the near future.
Right, Laila, the Egyptian foreign minister met with the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, as well as the Palestinian chief negotiator, Saeb Erekat, among others. There's been talk of setting up a working group. That working group will, of course, include the Israelis and the Palestinians, as well as Jordan and the Egyptians. And what it would do is develop what's been termed confidence-building measures. Is that a good start?
I mean, sometimes I look at these actors and these players that are, be it the countries like France or others in the region, and I wonder, do they have amnesia, or is it just a case of there's been so much invested in this process without actual peace, which is more of a sunk cost, that they, the conventional wisdom seems to be that the more we throw into it, money and time-wise, that perhaps, and ultimately something will come out of it, but it's just deja vu. It's like I feel like they're baking the same cake using different molds in a way. Every couple of years we have some new initiative or some new term, a roadmap, a confidence-building measures or whatever, proximity talks and so forth, the French initiative. But, ultimately without exacting a cost, without holding Israel accountable, nothing will change. And everyone knows the two-state solution, any prospect for a two-state solution is completely dead now. And if governments aren't willing to hold Israel accountable, then the citizens of the world and Palestinian civil society and others will, by means of boycott, divestment, and sanctions and so forth. And
when you say hold Israel accountable,
right,
what would you like to see?
I think Palestinians made very clear they would like to see holding Israel accountable for its actions, meaning the ongoing occupation, the settler colonial expansion and so forth, which has been going on since 1967, 40 years next year, for its war crimes in the Gaza Strip, amongst other places, these kinds of things. In other words, not drawing this continuous equivalency between Palestinian and Israeli action. Every sort of peace initiative that we have says, Palestinian violence and Israeli settlement expansion or so forth. It needs to be very clear that this is a case of occupied and occupier, and you have to hold, no amount of coaxing or proximity talks or whatever is going to convince Israel to stop its settlement expansion, to stop attacking Gaza and so forth, to give up Jerusalem and allow the refugees to return. It's as simple as that. And I think the Egyptian involvement and so forth with Abbas and the visit to Jerusalem, really it's just self-serving at this point. It's more of a means of challenging Turkey. I think it's a means for Sisi to be able to exert more influence, I think, in the region, to gain their assistance in terms of combating what's going on in Sinai, and perhaps even viewing Jerusalem as a road to Congress and to the United States and being able to get more aid from the U.S.